Boatworks today is sponsored by Total Boat and Alexial Yacht Coatings, as well as supported by the generosity from the beautiful folks over on Patreon. Thank you so much.
Holy crap, it works!
So welcome back, everybody. Hope you're having a fantastic weekend. My name is Andy with Boatworks today, and this week we're continuing on with the prep work on this little sailboat here to get it ready for the paint demonstration that we're going to be doing here shortly. But specifically in this video, I'm going to be focusing on a question that I get pretty much daily, which is, in a nutshell, it's basically, I've got this damage on my boat, the damage goes all the way through the hull, I don't have access to both sides to actually do the repair correctly. What are my options? Specifically, the area that we're going to be focusing on is right in through here. Now, this is up towards the bow of the boat. This is an area that had been previously patched. I can't say it was quite repaired, but it had been previously worked on, and this is the other area that we're going to be focusing on because this is right there. That's the hole that actually goes completely through the hull. Now, given how close these two areas are to one another, I'm not going to address each of these as two separate areas just because it's going to become a little bit too fiddly. So essentially, I'm going to take these two repairs, or these two areas, and turn them into one larger area so that, well, it'll be the more efficient way of doing this. Now, before we get into this, I want to make one point very, very clear, which is whenever you're dealing with an area that's been damaged and that damage goes all the way through the laminate, especially when it's below the water line, the ideal way or the recommended way of repairing that is to basically do that repair on both sides of the laminate, so both the interior as well as the exterior. You grind them down, dish them back up, so you're essentially making a solid, a solid fiberglass repair from both sides. Now, as we all know, that's not always possible. You don't always have access to both sides of the laminate. For one reason or another, maybe it's buried below the deck without any access to it. That's typically the case. Now, short of, let me back up here. There are some instances where this will not be applicable, all right? If it's a large hole below the water line and sometimes you just have to make access. I mean, that's just, the reality of it. But in this particular situation, this is a small boat, and typically whenever you're dealing with small boats, that usually equates to small stresses. Big boats, big stresses. Now, on a small little project like this, I am 100% confident in doing the repair that we're going to be outlining here, which is going to be addressing it from one side only. Now, if I were working on, say, like a 40, 50, whatever size boat, and it was a large hole below the waterline, I'm going to be cutting away everything that needs to be cut away to access that from the interior, as well as to be able to do the repair from the exterior. But in this particular situation, there's an inserted molded deck, inside this cockpit or the forward cubby area. And so it's essentially two shells kind of somewhat sandwiched together, and in between there, I suspect it's filled with foam. So I just don't have access, from the interior short of doing a major demolition job. And on a small little repair like this, that just doesn't make sense. So with that said, let's get these areas opened up and see what we're actually dealing with. All right, so let's do a quick little zoom in and see what we actually have going on here. And honestly, I'm a little bit surprised. I thought for sure that this cavity was going to be filled with foam. At least that's the way it sounded from the interior when I was kind of thumping on it here before I flipped the boat over. But nope, it's just a hollow void in there. Some kind of a little stiffener reinforcement panel right there, but beyond that, I suspect that's more for the deck than the hull. But essentially what I did here is I ground everything back until basically the lines on the crack terminated. And everything in between, well, that just ended up having to get removed. Now on this area up through here, the crack evidently did not go all the way through, but it did go through one layer, but not two layers. Looks like there's two layers of heavy woven on here, or woven roving on here. And that was part of the original construction on the hull. Now in this area here, this ended up being a little bit, actually opened up a little bit more than what I was anticipating. Still not a big deal. But basically what you're looking for is when you're grinding the damage away, you want to basically get it to the ends say the crack was running in either direction here. You want to grind it back until it stops. So basically you completely remove that crack there as well as here, and it kind of jotted out over in this direction here as well. So the way that we're going to be tackling this is going to be a little bit different than what's conventional here. And just as a real quick little diagram, let's just kind of say that this is actually the thickness of the hull. And kind of extend this out. And then this is the area, the hole that was opened up, and this is what we're looking to repair. Now, on a typical repair, you'd try and follow what's called, essentially it's a 12-to-1 rule. So if we were going to be addressing this from both sides of this damaged area, we'd be grinding down, let's say this is the interior and then the exterior side of this laminate. We'd be grinding this down to a taper like that, and then coming in with our new glass, we'd be building this back up until it's actually flush and completely repaired. Now, when you don't have access to both sides of the hull, you need to kind of change that a little bit. So rather than doing the typical 12-to-1 like we did up here, addressing it from both sides, what we're going to be doing is essentially addressing this from one side only, but we still need to run our taper. So now this time, our taper is going to run on one side down the full thickness of the damage. My corners didn't line up, but I think you get the idea. So that's why this area along the top here, this is ground down to a fine point all the way around. And then we'll be coming in and building up our glass here. Now, one other small change that we're going to do while we're grinding all this out is that, as I just mentioned, typically when you're looking at a repair, you want to try and do a 12-to-1 taper on this. So let's just say for every inch of thickness of laminate that you're going to be repairing, you want to extend your taper out 12 inches, all right? Now, that's if you're doing it from both the interior and the exterior from both sides. Now, when you're only going to be addressing this from one side, just using that same 1-inch thick laminate, instead of doing a 12-to-1, we're going to do closer to like an 18 or even 24-to-1. So we're running that taper out over a much larger area, basically distributing any stress that area might take over a much larger area. Now, on this particular boat, this hull is maybe an 1/8 inch thick. Now, kind of and this is just my general rule. But I try and do a minimum of a 4-inch taper all the way around, just regardless of how thick it is. It's better to be a little bit overkill than under. So I'm going to run this back probably another 3 inches all the way around on one half here, and then we'll be able to start laying up our glass. Now, I don't want to make this hole any larger than it already is. So at this point, because it's already ground down to a fine point, I'm just going to extend that taper back probably another 3 inches, give or take. So now with the taper on here done, now it's time to start thinking about what type of glass we want to use for building this back up. Now, if you've been following my channel for any period of time, you know that there's generally two different types of glass that I use, and it's 1.5 ounce chop strand matting and then 1708. Now, I typically use those two in very different ways, but I just kind of as a general umbrella, I guess, on how to define them. Chop strand matting for me is more as something you use for like cosmetics, and 1708 is what you use for actual structure. So, for example, with chop strand matting, I'll use that layer if I'm doing a repair and the build was all done with 1708. Usually, the last 2 layers that I'll do, that's going to be a finished surface. The last 2 layers that I'll do will be chop strand matting because it's a fabric that sands very smooth. You don't get a whole lot of pitting, and you don't get a lot of print through. Whereas if you try to do that same thing with 1708, you tend to get some texture or print through on that, and you don't get that with chop strand matting. Also, another thing that I'll use the chop strand for is, again, getting back to cosmetics, when I'm going to be going over, I guess, a larger area just to stabilize the surface, which is exactly what I'm going to be doing on this hull overall. That's just going to basically stabilize the surface, prevent any of the surface cracks that are in the existing hull from printing through so that we have a good solid surface for building off of. Now, 1708, it's a structure type of material. So anytime that strength and stiffness matters, sounds kind of weird, but anytime you're looking for, I guess, build in strength, 1708 is going to be your go-to. So that's how I break those two different types of fabric down. So the resin I'm going to be using to wet this out is going to be a laminating poly. Now, if I wanted to, could I use epoxy for this? Yeah, absolutely. And to be perfectly honest, given that this is below the waterline, it's actually what I would prefer to use, and it's what I would recommend doing. However, there's always a but. That would kind of create a little bit of an issue with the next step that I'm going to be taking here, which is going to be going over the rest of this hull with a layer of chop strand matting to stabilize the surface so that I have a good foundation for painting on. And well, going over top of epoxy with a polyester resin is just generally frowned upon. So just for the sake of maintaining consistency and always trying to show the correct way of doing it, I'm going to end up using poly for this patch so that when I go over to do the hull, it's going to be poly on top of poly, and there won't be any issues. All right, now when I'm laying this in place, I'm gonna get these 3 layers up, and I'm just gonna focus on around the edges here just to get basically a good bond around the perimeter. I'm not gonna be able to mess with it too much because I don't want to push down, work the middle and create a bit of a dimple in there. It's probably gonna have a little bit of a dimple regardless, but as much as I can minimize that, that would be great. That looks beautiful. I got a little bit of air I want to work out. Do the old tappy tappy. So it's been about an hour and a half, and the stuff it's set up enough where I can start working with it again. So right now, I can look on here and I can see that there's a couple little low spots. And I don't know that this is actually the best angle to try and show this, but holding a somewhat straight edge across here, it's low right in through here, probably about 1/8 of an inch. So an area right there, low about 1/8, and then a small little spot right here that's also low by about 1/8 of an inch. So the hull in this spot has a nice, just a gentle sweeping curvature here. And on those 2 low spots, basically that's going to be where I'm going to be focusing on, but I'm going to fill those in with it's like a thickened polyester resin. It's a structural repair putty. It's got, glass fibers kind of already mixed into it. So I'm going to use that to kind of fill in those low spots, and by eye, just want to try and establish that nice, curvature the best that I can. Again, most likely it's not going to stand out to its perfect finished shape, but it should get pretty darn close. So let me get a couple ounces of this stuff mixed up and trouble it in. Now, one thing I just want to mention is, because this glass was laid up using laminating resin, it's still sticky. I don't need to sand it. I can do anything with it. I can go right over top of it with another polyester-based material, and there will be 0 issues with adhesion. So, I mean, it might be a little bit off, but overall, I think the shape looks pretty close. So at this point, basically, we wait. I'm hoping that this is going to set up before I have to leave tonight, and it's already, 6 o'clock. So I'm going to give this one more hour to kind of set up, because I'm hoping that I'll still be able to come back, and I need to top coat this with something. That something could be PVA or polyvinyl alcohol. It could be gel coat with wax, which is probably what I'm going to end up using, or if I had like a wax additive that I could just mix in with the polyester resin, that would work as well. But I guess the main reason for it being there's no wax in this structural repair putty. So it's essentially still a laminating type of material. So I suppose if I wanted to, after this sets up, I could go over top of this with some more of the structural repair and without any issues. But I don't think I'm going to need to, and I don't want to build it up too much because then it's just going to create more sanding for me tomorrow. So I'm hoping, since I mixed this maybe a little bit hot, I'm hoping this is going to set up before I have to leave tonight, and then I'm going to go over top of this with some waxed gel coat. All right, so last night before I left, I was able to get the gel coat down here, get this top coated, and seal everything up, so now everything has fully cured. At this point, we're ready to start knocking it down. Now, I'm not anticipating being able to just go over this once, sand it, and have it be perfectly fair and done. Most likely, there's going to be some additional fairing that's going to be needed. So when I'm sanding this initially, I'm not going to be all OCD about trying to get it perfect. I just want to get the edges knocked down and then come back and focus more on the middle and see how, and just kind of assess it, see how things look. So when I'm sanding this, I'm going to, I guess, do it in a particular way. And by that, I mean, for right now, I'm just going to be taking my, the regular 6-inch DA, and I'm going to initially focus going around the perimeter. I want to get the edges kind of tapered off. Any of these little high bits of these gel coat or pieces of glass, I want to try and get the perimeter knocked down and kind of smooth into the surface. Then I'll come in and start focusing more on the middle. Now overall, this feels pretty good, but there are a couple of flat spots, namely right here, as well as like right in through here. But those are the only two low spots. The rest of this feels pretty good. So I did have to make a couple of quick passes, just in the middle here to scuff it up so I get good adhesion with the fairing compound. But right now, I think this is time to just basically give it a good wipe down and let's get some fairing mixed up. So now for the fairing compound, because I want to stay with polyester-based products, at least at this stage of the project, I'm going to be using the polyester fairing compound, and this gets catalyzed using the same hardener or whatever that you would use for doing your regular polyester resin, which is the MEKP or methyl ethyl ketone with peroxide. And for spreading it out on here, again, I'm going to be using this, at least to get it put down on the surface here. And then I'm going to switch over to a different type of spreader here. All right, now theoretically, I could probably just leave this as it is and I'd be able to sand the shape that I need to get out of it. But I am going to try this little tool right here. This is a little flexi sander. It's a little trowel thing, flexible, so it will be able to conform to any kind of contours that are on the hull here. And hopefully I can just do one pull and it'll give me essentially a perfect shape. There, that's what I was looking for. So at this point, we basically wait. Now we gotta wait for this material to set up. I believe The tech sheet or the data sheet on this says it'll set up within like a half an hour or so. It's still a little, we've had a little cool spell here at the shop weather-wise. So I think that was at like 77 degrees. It'll take like 30 minutes. So it's probably going to be a little bit closer to an hour in my temps here, which is about 68, give or take. So I'm going to get things cleaned up, kind of put away while this does its thing. And we'll be back when it's time to drive the longboard. So it's been about 2 hours since we laid this up, and it feels like it's all set up at least enough to start sanding here. Now for doing this, I'm going to be using a longboard. Whenever you're fairing something, this is really the tool to use. It's just going to give you a consistent, nice sweeping curvature or flat surface, whatever it is you happen to be doing. Now, you can make your own longboard here. I mean, this one is made by FlexiSander for what? Almost 15 years. I tried to find mine. I couldn't find it. I hope I didn't throw it away. It's got has some sentimental value. I'd put a lot of miles on my old one. But the old one that I used, I made it out of a quarter-inch piece of plywood, that's cut to whatever 2-3 inches wide, and screwed a handle on the front and the back, and boom, you got your longboard. So I'm going to be using this. I'm going to be using 80 grit and just basically going to be going over the surface and knocking everything down. Hopefully I don't have to come back and do any touch-ups. Yeah, so let's just kind of see what we find. All right, so this turned out very, very well. Very happy with this. And this is exactly, what I like to see. Fairing is not something, at least in my opinion, fairing is not something that should ever be laid up too thick, and there isn't much that's left here. It's wherever you're seeing this white, well, it's actually pink now because of the gel coat that got sanded into it. But wherever you see white, that's where the fairing compound is, and it's not thick at all. We had our two low spots right here and here, or maybe was it right here? I don't know. Anyways, there's evidently 4 low spots right now. And on that note, I'm going to quit while I'm ahead and wrap up this video. So I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you found it helpful. And if you did, please hit that thumbs up button. If you're not already subscribed, hit that subscribe button and the notification bell. Thank you in advance. If you have any questions, comments, leave those down below. And again, just to kind of reiterate from last week, Sunday mornings from 9 to 11 Central Time is when these videos post. If you happen to have any questions or comments, leave those down below and I'll be able to hopefully try and get back to you there at that time. So yeah, I'm just gonna wrap this up, let the weekend begin. So thank you for your time, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next week when we're gonna be wrapping the hull on here and hopefully being able to get to the fairing. We shall see, that's a lot to get done. But anyways, have a great rest of the weekend, I'll see you then.
This has been a Boatworks Today production.